Welcome to the True Body Intelligence Podcast. My name is Christopher Lee Maher. I'm your host. And today we are going to be getting into the impact of the daily drugs on how that affects your energy, your mood, your sleep, and everything else you can think about.
Christopher,
Hey.
I'm excited to do this part with you. It's a big one.
Yeah, it's a big one. I mean, what makes it big for me is that I had no idea that when I was younger and I was using these tools to manage my stress, I had no idea why I was even using them. I was just doing what everybody else was doing, right? So,
Specifically, we're going to be talking about different substances that people utilize.
yeah, 1000%. So I like to relate things back to my own story so that people can see like, he's also human. He's also made these mistakes and he's also educated himself and overcome these challenges, right? Because without that, there's no relatability. Without relatability, how's anybody going to take a risk on the things that I'm telling them? So actually, I'm a type of person who's extremely private. So spilling out what I used to do into the world around me, that is uncomfortable for me, right? So if I think about the most stressful time of my life, probably would have been when I was younger. And the first substance that I dug into in the daily acceptable drugs, maybe we should name those, right? White or brown sugars, right? Any refined sugar, cane sugar, nicotine to include vaping, marijuana to include vaping, alcohol, pharmaceutical, chemical intervention, and recreational intervention, plus food colorings and preservatives and any other kind of stress management tool that's negatively impacting us, even though we have no idea that there's a cost at the time. So the first drug that I got into was sugar. And I'm from Pennsylvania. My mom's from the coal regions of Pennsylvania. My father is from Pennsylvania as well. And they're both deceased. So my mom introduced me to sugar. And whenever I went to my grandmother's house, there was always a big bowl of candy. So when other kids would pour the cereal in the bowl, they might put on 1 scoop of sugar. I was throwing on like 5 or 6. Like the sweeter it tasted, the better it was. But then the challenge was when I was go to school, I'd fall asleep in class, right? So here I was, because I was drugged. I was drugged out. The second drug I got into was daily acceptable drug, alcohol, right? And actually, no, we're going to back up. The second daily acceptable drug I got into was exercise and pushing myself beyond what my body could recover from in a 24-hour period. And how do you know you've pushed your body beyond what you could recover from in a 24-hour period? It's simple. You have an injury. Your injury is telling you you went beyond your capacity. And I got my first injury when I was 16. I got an Achilles tendon. I got Achilles tendonitis on my left Achilles tendon. And then my next drug was alcohol, right? And it was rarely something I used at home. Probably, let me think, maybe never. But it was something that I used when I was social, right? So to go out, be at a frat party, pound a couple beers, you give them $2, they give you red cup, you can drink as long as there's beer in the tap, okay? And then in college, so there was beers, alcohol, and then there were cigarettes, right? So now you're at the party, somebody's passed around some menthols, right? And you're having like these weird feelings as you're smoking those things. And then after like a couple of those, I never liked the way that my mouth tasted the next day or the way my brain felt. So it was easy to drop the nicotine because one, it made me stink. How do we say this? My sense organs are very sensitive. So like that. And then I kind of dabbled in that in college. And then I got into the military. And in the military, you know, drinking is just like eating food. Like it's just part of the culture. And in the SEAL teams and SEAL training, it's a high stress environment. So when you got high stress, you're going to find negative stress management tools to cover up your high stress so that the next day you can go to work and feel or seem somewhat normal. But you just don't know that there's a cost because each day these substances are eating away at a little bit of your self-awareness, right? And then the next drug I got into, I think I probably sampled, you know, lightly what all the other drugs were. None of them ever made me feel better than feeling like myself, so they were never going to be interesting for me. And then I got a DUI when I was 27, right? And when you're thrown in a drunk tank, and I only blew 0.08, but still it was enough for them to take me down to the drunk tank or take me a few blocks to my house. They did the right thing for me. For my journey of waking up, they took me down to the drunk tank. And then after that experience, I extricated myself from all those substances. Caffeine never really worked for me. I tried it, but caffeine's an anxiogenic, so I got anxiety. And I don't like anxiety. I don't like the feeling of weird sensations in my stomach. I don't like heart palpitations. I don't like a racing heart either. I prefer calm and grounded. And so by the time I was, 33, I went to medical school studying traditional Chinese medicine and Western pathology at a very unique school called the Pacific College of Science in San Diego. And for midterms and studies, I was drinking white tea. And I would watch my vision change, right? After the test was over, my vision was very blurry after having caffeine. And then I decided I don't want to have blurry vision anymore. And so it took me till I was, 34, 35 years old, till I had extracted myself from the use of all daily acceptable drugs. And I had experienced them all. And so I could give you a really good background on the negative impacts and the positive impacts. But for this conversation, what's most important is that anyone tuning in to the True Body Intelligence podcast, they realize that all the energy you need, all the grounding you need, all the clarity of mind and intelligence you need, it's already sitting inside your body. And there's no need to grab substance in order to try to get access to it. In fact, because most of those substances are anxiogenics, meaning they're anxiety-causing agents, you will end up with more problems. And so I like to look towards a teachable moment, right? And a teachable moment for me is, where can we draw clearer distinctions? And the first distinction to make is stress ignorance, right? And that's where I was. I had no idea I had stress. And two, I had no idea I was just using these substances in order to overcome my own fears and anxieties and confusions. And in the end, none of them were helping, because then the next day I felt worse. And it took me a while to recognize the negative impacts. And once you decide to get well, it means that everything in your life is up for investigation, right? So my relationship with food, my relationship with drink, my relationship with sleep, my relationship with money, my relationship with sex, my relationship with everything was up for being looked at. And so as I started to get healthier, my awareness got higher, and then I was able to draw a greater distinction around stress. And one of the distinctions I drew is You have positive stress management tools and you got negative stress management tools. And the daily acceptable drugs, they all fall into negative stress management tools. Okay. There's no need for me to take caffeine to get focused when all I have to do is activate my spleen and my pancreas, and I can access intense focus without any substance. So why would I ever put something in my body that's bringing my energy down in the end? I want to take steps forward continuously. And so if I have the caffeine, got to step forward, but I also got to step back, right? I'm going to get some immediate energy. My heart rate's going to go up. My cortisol level's going to go up. My adrenaline level's going to go up. My heart's going to pound faster. I'm going to have more blood in my brain. I'm going to be in a state of hypervigilance. And am I willing to pay the cost? Well, if what you want to do is to feel good all the time, okay, I mean, good to great all the time, then you're unwilling to pay that kind of cost, which means that there has to be another option, right? Like, what drug addict? And when you look at the daily acceptable drugs, we could say that the people who eat sweets all the time are drug addicts. We could say the people who drink coffee every day, they're drug addicts. We could say the people who smoke cigarettes every day are drug addicts because they're using chemical intervention in order to manage their stress load. And so the alcohol, the drinkers, the smokers, the marijuana users, the recreational, the pharmaceutical, they're all drug addicts, right? And the question is, in true body intelligence, what can you do to interfere with that pattern? Because once you're on that pattern, it's difficult to get off that pattern. Like, people who work with me, I tell them immediately, like, if you show up and you've been drinking caffeine, alcohol, you've been smoking, you might as well go home. Because my job is to make sure that you get the most out of this life experience. And if you're on addictive substances, how can I help create a successful pattern interrupt for you?
Would you say, and this goes back to a question I asked you in the previous episode, where I asked you if you think there's any way to have somewhat of a healthy relationship with any of these substances. So wouldn't you say that the problem is pathology versus the substance itself? So, like, is it possible to, not drink 4 or 5 cups of coffee a day, but like, hey, when you feel a little bit of a down of an energy, you can use the coffee to supplement a little bit to bring you up to a level where you can function and then take it from there. But you still take responsibility for the amount of energy that you bring to the table, and then not create a I think we all agree that if you're dependent on the substance, there's an issue. But would you say that there's a way to have somewhat of a healthy relationship with one of these substances, or you're saying ultimately you want to get to a place where you need none of them?
I think if you give anyone an excuse and you give them an opportunity to say, oh, I can manage this, I can manage my poker addiction, I'll just go once a week. And then once a week turns into twice a week, and then twice a week turns into 6 times a month. And before you know it, they're broke again, right? And so my feeling is, if you're going to create a successful pattern interrupt from their stress load, you have to be willing to have an open, honest conversation, and you have to retreat from whatever your substance is completely. Because without them having a clear mind and breaking that dependency, they're always going to have that possibility in the back of their mind. And so what I encourage people to do, I get them on a 90-day program. I get them off all their daily acceptable drugs. And then I go on the 91st day, I go, look, get a bottle of wine, go down to Starbucks, get your favorite coffee, okay? Go down to the baker's, bake your favorite pie and eat it all. Tell me how you feel in the morning. And every single time, you know what I get? I'll never go near that stuff again. Because as long as you're on it even a little bit, you don't understand the full impact of it. I want you to feel the full impact. So now you can choose consciously to go, oh, do I really want to feel like that? Well, I remember yesterday I felt amazing. Today I feel like trash. Okay, what's the only thing that I did that was different? I drank the bottle of wine, I ate the pie, and I had a few cups of coffee. And now they get to feel chemically the impact of that choice. And that choice is then theirs, right? I'm only here to motivate you to take a risk. And the risk is to create a life that allows you to access your greatest amount of potential. And a lot of times the challenge isn't with the substances, it's the manufacturing, right? That really complicates the substance that you're taking in and starts creating brain damage, right? And when you damage the body, you damage the brain, you damage the emotions, you damage the energy. They're all connected. So whatever I do to my brain, I do to my body. Whatever I do to my brain, I do to my emotions. Whatever I do to my emotions, I do to my spirit, right? And so if I'm partaking on a consistent daily basis and imbibing on a daily acceptable drug, I have to look in the mirror and go, oh, I'm kind of using this to manage my life. If you're using it because your focus is poor, that's one thing. Other people are using it because their energy is low. Other people use it because they don't know how to communicate, right? So your motivation is irrelevant. What's really important is that you've been using this substance and you're willing to investigate, why am I on this substance? Like when I had the DUI, that morning I went home. I went into my downstairs half bath in the house that I was living. It was a townhome in Point Loma, San Diego. And I looked in the mirror and I had a long conversation. And my spirit looked back at me and said, look, you need to figure out how you got here. And then I called my Aunt Betty. You know what my Aunt Betty said? She said, Christopher, you come from a family of alcoholics. Of course you got a DUI. For her, it was like a no-brainer. For me, I was like, what do you mean a family of alcoholics? She goes, well, you thought like when we had family celebrations, that was the only time everyone was drinking? And I was like, oh, she goes, you didn't see them in their regular lives. And I said, oh, okay. And then recently I went back to celebrate my aunt's passing, and I was there with my family, and you know, they were doing what they usually do, and that's their thing. They don't know any different, right? So a lot of these strategies, they've been passed on from generation to generation, and they're part of their genetics and epigenetic expression now. And so whenever you're on a daily acceptable drug, you're methylating your system, right? And you're aging extremely fast. And look, let's say you only got one life and reincarnation is a hoax, right? Well, if you can get 110, why would you settle for 65? Right? I'd rather be here for 110 years and experience as much as I can experience in this body and this energy and these emotions, and the daily acceptable drugs are definitely an interference.
So how do people take it upon themselves? Obviously they can come see you and learn techniques, but are there any things that people can do by themselves to help themselves?
Definitely. See, first you need, so we did stress ignorance, which means the person is unaware, right? And I would say the majority of people who are going to tune into the True Body Intelligence podcast initially, they're going to be in stress ignorance. Well, what do we want for them? We want them to be able to be at least stress aware first. And then from there, they can make a choice. Do I want to use negative stress management tools, which would be the daily acceptable drugs? Or do I want to use positive stress management tools? Well, look at the world today. What do we got? You can get on YouTube and you can find, you know, somebody that's doing Taoist practices and healing breaths, or the microcosmic orbit, or the inner smile. And then you've got it's like 1,000 different forms of meditation. I might be exaggerating, but there's at least 30 or 40 good ones. Okay, you've got all kinds of different breathwork strategies. You've got all different types of exercise. Then you're using positive stress management tools. And what I mean by positive stress management tool is very simple. It's a plus plus. There's not a plus minus. So if you go and your positive stress management tool is running and you run for 3 hours, and then you are wearing away at the cartilage underneath your knee, now your positive stress management tool has now turned into a negative stress management tool. If you go for a 30-minute run and there's very little wear and tear on you structurally, that's a positive stress management tool. If you go to the gym and you pound weights for 4 hours and every joint in your body hurts for the rest of the week, well, your session at the gym now is shifted from a positive stress management tool into a negative stress management tool. What this requires is temperance, right? And understanding there's times to push yourself for elevation, and then there's times to be able to do things in a balanced way relative to your life expression. If you're a dad that's married, 4 kids, 75-hour work week, going to the gym for 4 hours or running, getting into a 110-mile race on a weekend is going to interfere with the rest of the other aspects of your life. And so you've got to be able to assess, what's my stress load? And what can I do to effectively reduce my stress load, but have enough stress that I continue to evolve?
So basically balance even in the stress department.
Balancing the stress department.
So you basically, the different substances usually are forms of stimulation, or they're forms of change to the rhythm of your system, or numbing. It's just like you're trying to regulate by the substances. So now you find something that builds you as a person in addition to managing your stress. If it's breath work, if it's swimming, if whatever, but even there, you want to make sure that it stays within the bound of the healthy versus outside of that bound.
Right. Yeah, okay. Like you can go extreme, and there's benefit to extreme. But if you go extreme all the time, there's a place where you have to question, why do you need to do things at an extreme level in order to feel alive? Because when your body, brain, and nervous system are balanced physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, you feel alive all the time. You feel inspired all the time. You feel happy the majority of the time. You feel joyful, excited, grounded, energized, potent, powerful everywhere you go. Now, sometimes somebody needs to run a marathon in order to feel like they can do something difficult. And then that builds their esteem. There's value in doing things extreme when it builds your esteem. But when it destroys your body, now we have to question, what's the purpose of this? Because if I'm gaining in one area and I'm losing in another, there's no net gain, right? And the question is, how do I utilize my life and everything that's in my life to produce net gains? And so this requires what I consider to be a very important element to develop in your life, which is 1, being in reality, and 2, being inwardly and outwardly honest with yourself, which is a whole nother episode to be able to dig into, to motivate people to ask these bigger questions, right?
I love that. I always think, whenever I, with substances in my life, I always think of it in terms of, if I get stuck in the woods right now, I want to be in a place where I don't have to detox from anything, or at least my partaking with the substance is not that deep that if I don't have it for a couple of days, I start getting cold sweats, or I get like very nervous, or can't think straight. So that's where my bound is. That's why I asked you about the healthy relationship with substances, because, for example, for me, I know that, yeah, there are days in which I allow myself to be more reliant on certain types of substances, like coffee or matcha, whatever it is. But I do feel that I've reached a place where I have somewhat of a healthy relationship with those, in that when I go over a certain limit, I'm like, oh, okay, this is like, we're using it way too much. But I hear what you're saying. You're saying that ultimately you might want to step to a place, if you can, because what I'm hearing you saying is that the reason we're doing all these things is because we're trying to escape something. Either it's a lethargic feeling, pain, some kind of a repressed memory, whatever it is, but we're always trying to correct something. So what you're suggesting is that you're going to be better off if you can just go to the core, correct that thing, and then you don't need to escape anymore, and you don't have to be dependent on anything.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. And to go a little deeper, in true body intelligence, what we figured out are the substitutes for those substances, right? So your body already knows how to manufacture those kinds of energies, those kinds of experiences. So there's no need to use an exogenous experience to elevate yourself internally, right? So you got endogenous, which is internally, and you've got exogenous, which is externally. So exogenous means I have to take something from the outside and put it on the inside to stimulate focus, to stimulate awareness, to stimulate more energy production. What I'm suggesting is that true body intelligence is an endogenous experience, and we have the tools to be able to teach you how to activate those internally, where there's no negative feedback, no negative cost, only more positive life expression.
So I did hear you mention that the deeper part of the substance use is being able to be honest externally and internally. Can you say a little bit more about that?
I would love to get into that, but I think what's more important right now is that we give the listeners a little break to process everything they process. And then what we'll do is we'll get into inner outer honesty, which is the last part in this episode.
You mentioned that the deeper part of the substance use is being honest externally and internally. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yes. So what I think is more important right now is that we end and give them a little bit of space to process everything that they've tuned into, because people have their attachments, right? And I get it. I mean, I'm human. I've had my attachments, and I've had my relationship with the daily drugs, and I've been able to break that. But in order to get into what he's talking about, we have to look a little deeper underneath the hood, and that's to get into inner and outer honesty. And I think we're going to save an entire part to get into the depths of that, so you have a deeper understanding and give you a little bit of space and time to process everything that we went through and to figure out, well, what does inner and outer honesty mean to me? Thank you for tuning in to today's content. This will be made available in its full form of everything we put together for you at truebodyintelligence.com. And at truebodyintelligence.com, you can tune into my book, Free for Life, a U.S. Navy SEAL's unique journey to inner freedom and outer peace. And there I will teach you at a much deeper level. And this will be really, really, really good reference tool for you. Plus, the audiobook has an opportunity to allow you to start the program already by purchasing the one with the energetic integrations, and that will help you get started. All of this content will also be available on all major platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, X, and YouTube.